your breath. Try to scare yourself to death. Bury your bones under the dirt and tear at your heart and rip your shirt and stomp your feet in disgust. Curse the gray skies if you must, but you'll find when you are done, blue skies for everyone.
How's everything in Ireland, by the way?
Up here, we've got a lot of snow, which is very lovely. It doesn't normally lie in Ireland, but it's lying today, and it's just gorgeous. Well, it's fine, but we're in a very severe lockdown for a very long time.
Oh, yeah, I know.
I'm in Donegal, which is in the north of the country. It still belongs to the Republic, but it's up in the north wing. So
here in the United States, it's pretty crazy. It's pretty crazy. Yeah. I don't know if you heard, but we had a minor insurrection.
It was unbelievable to think that happened in America. You turn on the TV and you think that can't be America. It's just so shocking. The events have been so shocking. I mean, I hope you're on the right path now.
Yeah, me too. Are you ready? Do you have any questions?
No, I'm all set. No.
Okay. Welcome, everyone, to Acton Perspective Podcast. I'm your host, Hugh Simonik. Today, we are sitting down with Dr. Yvonne Barnes-Holmes out of Ireland. And in case you don't know who she is a world-renowned pioneer in relational frame theory, which is a behavioral account of understanding the complexities of human language and cognition. You are also the co-founder, along with Dr. Kira McIntyre. Am I pronouncing her name right?
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah. Process-based behavioral therapy. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. You are also a world trainer in acceptance and commitment therapy, which goes well with what we're going to talk about. You have been an academic, a researcher, a clinician. You've written over 150 scientific articles, or published 150 scientific articles and book chapters, and given over 500 presentations and workshops internationally. And you've been a behavior therapist for over 22 years, correct?
Yeah, that's all
you've
correct.
done a lot. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
You bet. I really enjoyed the training that you gave that introduced me to PBT. Talking a little bit about process behavioral therapy, there's a great website that I found information on in case anybody is lacking that RFT background, is go-rft.com that your team created at the University of Ghent in Belgium when you were doing research. And if you scroll down to the bottom of that page, there is, I found plenty of research articles, but one research article in particular that I found helpful was updating RFT more field than frame and its implications for process-based therapy. And that seemed to give a really good context of history and what this is exactly.
Yeah, it does. For me, that really is the article that springboards RFT, developments in RFT, and why they can make such a clinical difference, how you can actually stay rooted to the basic research floor and actually just layer your clinical work, feeding down into that all the time. So, and I think you can only really do that with the updates, or do it really well, or the best way to do it is with the updates in RFT. We could do it before, but not at this level of groundedness in the concepts, and not with this level of precision. And I think that article really, builds that bridge really nicely.
Right. Yeah, it certainly did. I want to mention here too, I think it's important that you're dedicated to bringing greater precision to understanding and applying psychology from a behavioral and functional analytic perspective. That I think is important to note, because this is not just another clinical approach. This is a precise science that about understanding and intervening on complex psychological issues, correct?
Yeah, we never wanted, and I don't think psychology needs just another approach. I think it actually needs to revert back to its beginnings. And I mean, a lot of the approaches have been built on the same foundations. And I frankly believe those foundations are shaky. I think a much more workable place to work off is the behavioral functional analytic tradition. There's very, very solid scientific foundations. And I think if you work off them, we won't end up going down one slightly blind application alley over another. I mean, if you look at the way that the behavioral tradition have used those foundations for the purposes of developing applied behavior analysis, ABA, it's just absolutely second to none in working with populations with limited verbal ability and with overt behavioral issues. And in a way, I think what we've done is analogous to that, except unfortunately, that ground needed to be updated. And RFT was the update, because what we are dealing with adults is complex verbal behavior. And so I think we've taken, the same strategy that the ABA folks have taken, and gosh, in terms of application, what they have done is absolutely second to none, and it has lasted and carries you right up to pretty verbal levels. So this is the step after that. I think, but the strategy was the same, rather than the generic mainstream psychology strategy, which is often go looking and forget that the ground you're on is marshy and muddy and it's not stable.
Yeah. I've always been curious why ABA lagged behind the curve. We had a great opportunity back, apparently late 90s to really engage with relational frame theory, to move into the post-Skinnerian approach, to working with more complex, verbally sophisticated individuals. But it seems like we're just catching up now. Why is that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely fair to say they're just catching up now. That is true. I think, in my view, there were a couple of factors. I'm not sure the hierarchy were really supportive of RFT. I think partly because it was post-Skinnerian. I think they felt that it was a little bit anti-Skinnerian. Of course, it wasn't. You wouldn't have RFT without Skinner. And it's a very hierarchical organization, or certainly was historically. And it's a very patriarchal organization, to be honest. And I think what was really happening at the top was a lot of stagnation in terms of the core concepts and in terms of the individuals who I think weren't supportive. I mean, the thing about ABA, young people are very, very fresh. They're very smart. They're very progressive. But I think they were getting suffocated by a rather stagnated leadership. And the leadership, to be fair, absolutely is now supportive of RFT and has changed. But I think in part that has happened because young people have said, listen, we're going this way. We want to know this new stuff. We are dealing with complexity. We are dealing with storytelling and perspective taking. And they wanted, I think, to be broader clinicians rather than just low verbal ability clinicians. They got more and more interested in the higher end of things. So I think there have been changes top and bottom, there are changes afoot. That's for sure. It is rather late, but better late than never, I suppose.
Yeah, I agree. And even if I find even if you work with nonverbal individuals, knowing this helps give clarity.
Absolutely right. I mean, that's very true. And I think we knew that from very early on. But I think for political and optics reasons, we didn't really say that too loudly, because I think when we early on tried to say, but it would really be a good idea to do this from the beginning. Once they start getting generalized operants like imitation, we think it would really help if you start to program these in. But that was not a popular move because ABA and ABAI, I think they were more comfortable with, let us do our stuff, and when we need the complex stuff, we'll call on you guys. And in a way, look, we just had to let that be so. But for us conceptually and on the applied end, it always made sense to go in early in the verbal trajectory and start getting the generalized performances. But I mean, it's just not where the community was at the time.
Yeah. Do you think that it's actually hurt the science with therapists, psychologists who don't have that behavioral analytic background now practicing acceptance and commitment therapy without really understanding RFT?
I think, in my experience, at clinicians who are behaviorally trained, I think do better therapy. To be honest, that's my. Of course, I would say because I'm behaviorally trained, but I think ACT is very functional analytic at its roots.
Yeah.
And I mean, we've trained a lot of people in 20 years, and I certainly see a very big difference in those who have exposure to behavioral science and functional analysis and those who don't, because it's
Right.
learning to think functionally is a real hurdle. It's a real skill.
Yeah.
I suppose it depends on the way you want to do ACT, but if you want to do the way ACT, I think it was conceived in line with its roots in functional thinking and behavior analysis, then I think if you bring that to the table, it's quite an easy sell after that, and a relatively easy training that bit is very, very difficult.
Yeah. Well, let's get into what process-based behavioral therapy is, if you can explain that a little bit.
Process-based behavior therapy is the application, the clinical application of the unit of analysis as we now see it, the ROE, the ROE, the relating, orienting, and evoking. And we see it as the basic unit of the basic unit of complex psychology, the basic unit of language, of cognition, complex thinking, whatever you want to call it. And what PBBT does is that it puts that ROE at the center and basically says that all behavior pivots around rows.
Mm-hmm.
And our job is to, and I had to simplify a little bit to make it make sense, but our job is to identify the way in which rows are problematic,
Mm-hmm.
and then shift them so that they contain relational patterns and they contain functional patterns that are actually progressive and adaptive and healthy for the person's life, rather than the rows that form or seem to exist or that emerge that are just full of functionality that's not helpful for the client, and they're full of patterns of relating that are painful and horrible and suffocating and negative and judgmental, etc. So our job is to identify rows and basically turn them around so that they are working for the person, not against the person. So PBBT is the process and the skills and the exercises and the techniques that identify rows and that teach you how to move them.
Yeah. And is it fair to say, when you're talking about the ROE, that the behavior analytic or the functional analytics side of that is the orienting and evoking
Absolutely.
side, right? Okay.
Absolutely right. Except that I think it's quite hard for folks, I think for me to really get them to appreciate that is only glued together because of the relating, because the relating is where the meanings are at.
Right.
And it's like, the relating pattern dictates what the functions will be. Of course, functions affect relating too, but it's almost like the functions are the add-on, or the sort of ring around the planet, but the planet is the meaning, is where the relating is at. That's why those particular functions are the way they are, because the system coheres together.
Right. Yeah, the relating is the narrative, the story.
It's exactly
created. Yeah. And the great thing about this is there is a HDML, the hyper dimensional multi-level framework. And
exactly. So it puts the levels of relational skill, for example, on the left-hand side. It puts at any one example of any one of those levels, it says, well, how strong is this particular response at that level? And then inside each cell, you have a row which says, well, okay, if I understand the response, I know what it looks like, I know what level is at, I know how strong it is, but what's the functionality that's tied to that pattern of relating? And so the dimensions in the top end, the levels on the left, and the row sitting in the middle, and that essentially is the HTML framework.
Okay. All right. Let's talk a little bit about functional analysis. I think, I'm a behavior analyst. What I had learned in graduate school, is that relevant anymore? These 4 functions of behavior, is that at all, usable?
That is, I think for me, that's the $6 million question,
Mm,
because I think it is and it isn't. I think it isn't to the extent that I don't think the complex behavior we're talking about is maintained through the three-term contingency. I don't
yeah.
think even most of it's acquired that way, to be honest. So that was an analysis that was built around the three-term contingency
Mm,
view. And if the three-term contingency no longer applies, then that would probably be no longer useful, at least not in the same way to the same extent. But at the same time, it is still the case for us that all behaviors have functions, and the functions are essentially approach and approach, avoid, or neutral with the
right.
row. So that bit of it, I think, is still very similar. You know, people are still seeking attention. People are still moving away from pain. I mean, a lot of that still applies.
Mm,
But I think you have to be super careful now with the underpinning view that this is contingency based, just like when it was before. And
right.
it isn't. It just doesn't look like it is. The row gets you as close to understanding the dynamical interaction between relating and evoking. But how contingency sensitive that is,
Mm,
in terms of the row is, we would still need a lot more data on that
yeah.
because we're still in the early days of the row. But I think you really have to take quite a few steps back from the three-term contingency view, because look, that fell short, and that's why RFT came about. You've got to get your head around the generalized operant. You
Yeah.
really have to take that leap of faith, and that is a leap off the contingency operation. It just
Yeah.
is.
Yeah. Yeah. What does the new model look like for a verbally sophisticated individual?
I think the new model gives you two things. I think it really allows you to embrace that multifunctionality,
Mm,
that, you know, that you can see a cluster of behaviors that are all part of a relating, and
mm,
they will move you towards some things and move you away from other things, and they're all part of the same row. And that's,
yeah.
it's really hard to get multifunctionality in the old way of thinking. The row also, and RFT generally, tells you that those functions, they cohere around a certain meaning. They don't just stack up together. Why that function and not another, especially
Yeah.
if you've moved out the concept of direct reinforcement and you're
Yeah.
working with generalized operants? That, well, because if you, this person has a narrative about themselves, and it may be a relatively limited narrative, but there is
Mm,
a narrative that connects those functions together. So it's not the old way of thinking was very one dimensional. It was almost as if the organism was just moving around with arms and legs, and there wasn't actually
yeah.
anything happening.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, you know, I don't mean in an ontological sense, or in a purposeful sense, but it was almost like the human being in there didn't matter. They were just some sort of vehicle for behavioral performance.
Right.
This actually digs much deeper and says, no, no, the behavioral performances are all part of a pattern that has emerged. And
Yeah.
that self story is that pattern. And when you
Mm,
look at matchmaking the pattern to the behavior, the
mm,
evoking, it matches absolutely perfectly every time. The behavior is not random or chaotic at all. The behavior seems to pivot. The functions pivot
right.
and spin around the relating time and time and time again, and it's never not so.
Right.
So those are the two pieces that I think it adds that makes a really big difference. That multifunctionality was always a struggle,
Yeah.
behavioral thinking, even with
Yeah.
relatively limited verbally sophisticated individuals.
Mm. Right. Right. And you give a couple examples there's a couple examples in the paper that are really good, but you know, take an individual that is experiencing a lot of shame, and so they have a very strong and very complex shame network, um, and it's uh, it's pretty inflexible, and you know they've been at it for a long time, so there's low derivation. So you're sitting down with them and you're getting to know them beyond the rapport. How would you then, what kinds of things would you look for to know that this is what they're orienting to, this is what is evoked, this is what they're relating to?
So they tend to give you little bits and pieces here and there. They tend to tell you a little bit about the relating along the lines of, that's typical of me, isn't it? Sure, I'm always getting it wrong. So you get these little bits of negative relating coming at you. And in the relating end of it, we're sort of, I'm going to simplify, but we tend to be on the lookout for me equals bad in some way, because there tends to be a lot of that about. They also give you little hints on the functional end, like, when the pain shows up, I just can't bear it. Or, if I don't change it, I'm never going to go anywhere, or someone's going to leave me or whatever. So you get hints of the functions and you get hints of the relating. We tend to focus on relating first because it tends to guide you very clearly towards what functions are likely to be predicted, what's going to be a move toward, what's going to be a move away. So we start to very gently set our sights on, you said you had a lot of negative thoughts about yourself. I wonder, could you tell me something about them? So it's like we take these story layers and we build the layers up, and then we sort of set them out there, and then we look at the layers and we see, okay, if you added that layer and that layer and that layer, that cake would look like this. And then that would be the icing on the top, would be deep down, I think I'm disgusting. And so we sort of very gently nudge up towards, well, in a sense, I think we nudge down towards the bottom layer. And that sounds and looks psychodynamic and it is in many ways, it is, but there are layers of relating that form across time. And they tend to, I think, sort of layer up from what is a pretty core area that boils down to some sort of self-hatred, self-loathing, invalidation, fear of rejection. I mean, they're all the things that you see in therapy all the time, but they do all boil down to, I'm bad in some way. I'm not good enough. I'm not smart enough. I'm not ahead of the game, or whatever that is. And then we sort of keep an eye on the functions that go with that when, what is it that they can't say? What is it that they experientially avoid? I mean, shame is one that people, they very rarely talk about at the very beginning of therapy. They start talking about mistakes, guilt, failures.
Yeah.
Can they feel shame? No, because it's just too painful. It's too highly avoidant.
Right.
But of course, some stage we're going to have to bring that into the room, because that the avoidance of shame is a key part of that narrative.
Yeah. And there are so you're looking for certain words that they use or they don't necessarily.
Exactly.
And
yeah,
then,
words and phrases. And it could just be movements as well. You could put, say, God, that sounds like if I thought that about myself, I think I'd really be struggling with shame. And they might just, you just see them pull back, or, they might say, no, it's definitely not shame. It's more like, and you're thinking, no, it probably is actually, because they're just working within the limits of what they can cope with at the time that they can cope with it. So our job is to always nudge them, to draw out what's there, to nudge them towards a more articulate, more experiential way of talking about what they really do feel if they can let it in. And then we glue that package together, and then we find a way of deconstructing it.
Right. And when you're talking about getting down analysis of why they feel the way they feel, right, or why they're doing what they do, you're not talking about getting down to exploring childhood history of, oh, well, this is where it started. Are you? Or
we could be. I mean, we very rarely get to this is where it started, because it is always a series of events, and they end up always looking the same because they give rise to the same perception with very few exceptions. So we tend to build up a history that makes the way you are make sense to you, so that you realize it isn't you. Because if I was in that history, I'd have come out just the same. It's really about anchoring what I have now in the history that gave rise to it. Now, that's a really validating thing to do. It's also just very helpful because it allows you to see, okay, so there are things about this that I can and things about this that I can't change. So where do I go from here? So it's about anchoring what I have now in how it evolved across time. And it very rarely comes down to singular events. It's usually a pattern. It's like different ingredients produce a cake.
Yeah, because I was thinking too, how trustworthy is their network? When they, so you can ask someone, so where did this all start? And they're prone to tell you a narrative that leads you down a road that's not, that they may think is valid, but it's more avoidance than anything else.
Yeah, because they're operating, they're telling you from inside the story. And you're
Right.
never going to hear it from
Right.
outside the story, but your job is to piece it together. Your job is to
Yeah.
listen to any details that look like they were accurate and true, but that created the story just the way it is, which is just the way they're telling it to you. But behavior comes in patterns. It's very
Mhm.
rarely random and never chaotic. So once you've heard a couple of versions of the same story, you become very adept at thinking
Mhm.
that's actually a bit like that. And the likelihood is that, I mean, I'll give you an example. Some people have very traumatic experiences that have a heinous impact on their behavior, very specific bits of it. And then other people, that's in their story, but it isn't having the same effect. There's another bit of the story that formed because something slightly different about those events was perceived or taken on board. So,
Yeah.
I mean, everybody, history gives rise to all these outcomes, but in these subtle, nuanced ways that are similar across individuals, but it doesn't lend you to, okay, so that happened. So everybody who experienced that, then it must have turned out to be the same. Because, for example, experientially, there's a very big difference between, you know, self-hatred and self-disgust. They're not exactly the
Yeah.
same thing. They have different functions and different relational patterns. So our job is to listen to what seems outside the story so you can understand it, to explain to you, but how did the story form just the way they're telling me now? Yeah, I mean, there are variations. I mean, if
Yeah.
someone has, you know, talked about something lighter in a way than discussed, like, I just don't like myself, don't know who I am, stuff like that. And as the relationship's unfolding, you can feel it, the sense of hatred coming out, because they're just
Mhm.
more comfortable in saying it to you, and you've built a context where they feel safer in terms of approaching painful content and painful words like that. And so it's a bit like you've seen Disgust's brothers and sisters, and then you can feel him coming into the room, and then he comes into the room, and it's a really pivotal moment because they've now started to go to a place that they just couldn't go to before, and you're there with them. So you don't get big surprises very often like that. If disgust is coming out, it's probably, if it's been really avoided, it's going to come out rather slowly. And
Yeah.
your job is to get sort of, it's a bit, I always think of it's a bit like shaping, get an
Uh,
approximation closer and closer, but you're not prodding into them, they're coming with you. You could say,
yeah.
I mean, you've talked about hating yourself. That's a really strong way of talking about yourself.
Mhm.
I mean, how negative does it go? So you're
Mhm.
setting up a context where if disgust, the feeling of disgust
Mhm.
is being avoided, then you're gently nudging that to come into the room at the pace that suits them. It's not too painful. You'd never say, like, a question, so do you think it's disgust? I mean, that would be horrible.
Right.
It just wouldn't work. Our job is
Right.
to nudge them
Right.
closer and
Right.
closer
Right.
to the things that you guess they've been avoiding. And it's a guess because you don't know, because it's been avoided.
Right. Right. And does it always start with the relation, the deictic I, and so does it always contain what is the self relating to, and what alliances can I establish with that I?
Yes, it is. It's
Okay.
always, for us, it is always that the core question for us is that I is in a relational pattern with whatever negative stimuli.
Right.
Our job is to absolutely find that, get experiential approach on the stimuli in the room, look at the functions that have
Mhm.
been surrounding that. But that is what PBPT does. It goes after me negative what, and what are the
Right.
functions around that.
Right.
And that, in our experience, and of course in experience of lots of other therapies, not just us, but it makes total
Mhm.
sense, is that the core underpinning of your behavior is the deep knowing sense of who you are.
Mhm.
Whether that's correct or not, and whether it's
Yeah.
good or not, that is forming all of the time as behavior is becoming increasingly selective and complex. And
Yeah.
our job is to get to that, rearrange it if we need to, and in doing so, rearrange the functions so that they are more adaptive than non-adaptive, or however you want to describe that.
Yeah, and just to clarify too, when you're talking about the functions, so if a person comes in, they have a very strong, very coherent shame network. What would then the function be defined with that? Like how?
You will see two sets. You will see a lot of avoidant functions.
Uh-huh.
For example, if there's a shame issue going on, you're going to have something like I'm bad. Because if you
Right.
have shame as a function, right, you could have I'm shameful, like I'm a
Mhm.
bad human being and that makes me feel shame. Anything connected to shame is going to be avoided because,
Okay.
again, because it's part of the me bad, me disgusting bit. So you're going to have negative relating the variations in complexity, etc. Derivation is going to be low. You're going to have avoidance of shame or anything connects to that because it connects to you being bad. And you're probably going to have, and this is what I think is quite different about PBBT, you're going to have a lot of approach behavior. You're going to be approaching like, you know, being good, getting other people to like you, working too hard, you know, being the perfect parent. You're going to get a lot of approach behavior that's a bit like proving I'm good because it's proof that I'm not bad. So for us, it
Right.
isn't just the avoidance. That's a big part of it. And ACT is very focused on that. But I think what differentiates PBBT from other regimes, we're very focused on the approach behavior because it's a bit like the approach behavior sits on top and the avoidance just all seems to flourish in underneath.
Right.
You get a lot of like clean behavior, like an awful
Okay.
lot of I need to care for other people. I can't make any more mistakes. You know, if you have someone, for example, with a history of being sexual victimization and they carry a lot of self-disgust, then and if they have shame about that, which of course is awful because it's not their shame, but they carry it as if it was. That's very often the way abuse like that leaves you. Then what you tend to see outward is you tend to see very much a lot of proving that's about you know, bad stuff didn't happen to me. I could never do bad stuff to another person. I must look good all the time. My body must be perfect. I can't
Okay.
look. I mean, you see you see a lot more approach behavior than you see avoid behavior. And approach
I
behavior
see.
tends to look like the opposite of the
Yeah.
thing that's being avoided because, you know, deep down I'm disgusting. On the surface of it, I have to look like I'm perfect. And
Okay.
you see a lot of people like that.
Yeah. And so then take that example where she, a client is saying you have to look perfect. They have perfectionism and those approach behavior. How do you address that? How do you possibly address those approach behaviors?
First thing we do is really validate them because they have a legitimate place in that person's life. It's just that they have a legitimate place in a story that's a two-part story. The front part that says, look at me, I'm perfect, and the back part that says, look at me, I'm not perfect. So we start
Right.
really validating and getting that approach behavior on the
Okay.
table and connecting that approach behavior to the part of the narrative that says, when I do this, I'm good. And then, of course, people have contexts where they can't do it and it all just gets too much for them. And then we say, okay, so what about those days when you can't get out of bed? Well, where's perfect then? Oh no, that was. So in some contexts it's this, in other contexts it's the opposite. That's like being on a pendulum of a clock. That's like, is it like that? Is it like swinging? But I've always got to make sure the pendulum swings to the clean end. Yeah, it's very often what clients will say. So then we start to, with the client, build up the picture of the pendulum.
Okay. You're talking about approach behaviors like obsessive cleaning, perfect grades,
Yeah, exactly.
dressing
Yeah.
perfectly. Do you allow them to, when you're validating, do you allow them the room to see what that network is for themselves, or do you point that out?
Not till quite a bit later.
Okay.
We let it be as it is, and just say, for example, if people are out to be the perfect mom, which is very common, or the perfect colleague, and it's a part of that approach behavior, we will validate it by saying, you're an incredible trier, and I even see you really trying in here. And you know what? I think that's absolutely the right ingredient. I think that's really fantastic. It's just part of me breaks my heart because your trying never seems to go somewhere. So
Right.
it's almost like you're coming in underneath it, around the back of it, and
Yeah.
saying, "Listen, you're absolutely amazing, but there does appear to be a cost to you here. Where are
Yeah.
you in all of this? It's like this. It's like this big clean hand has got you in its clutches. So very slowly, it's where are you in this? And that tends not to invalidate or not to have a feel like you shouldn't be doing that. You're making some sort of mistake. This is irrational. Those are none of the things that we want in that
Yeah.
end.
Yeah. No, I see where you're building the alliance there, and you're gaining their trust, but you're allowing them to turn on the light bulb above their head.
Absolutely right.
You
It's
know what? I never really saw it that way before.
absolutely right. As an experience, and we will very often reflect the experience of the therapist by saying, when I watch you do that, I mean, I totally get it. It just breaks my heart because, at what cost to you? So
Right.
we tend to, the therapist tends to stay very grounded and say, from the position that I look at, as at my experience is this, and that really does help the experience of the client to go in the direction that you want. Does it really look painful? Yeah, it really does look painful over here. What's it like for you? So we do an awful lot of that sort of looking in, but normalizing at the same time. Because if we'd swap places and you were over here looking in, I'd be doing exactly what you're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. And working with children who are very vulnerable, right? And that light comes on when they go home. They're being fed those same contingencies of, the parent is not understanding the child's behavior, and it's adding to the shame and blame network. How in the world do you get out of that cycle?
Psychologists aren't social workers, right? That's a
Yeah.
social work context, and we've just got to be very aware that it's there. And what you don't want is that you don't want to increase the punitive behavior by a parent by, oh yeah, now you're a smart aleck. I mean, that's frankly just very dangerous. So
Yeah.
I mean, we always know what we can't change. We would really try to encourage holistic treatment where the parents are also in treatment
Yeah.
because they're part of the problem and part of the solution.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't want children being taken from home because there are many contexts where that doesn't work either. So knowing absolutely every second of every moment that we're constrained by the rules of the house and the dynamics
Yeah.
at home. But our job in a situation like that is very often A, to keep the child alive, and B, to keep whatever sense they have about themselves that's strong, keep that alive and keep it
Yeah.
growing until we get them out of there.
Yeah.
That could be years, but I've had many 14-year-olds, and my job, in a funny sort of a way, is to be like a parallel parent, holding their hand, giving them
Right.
guidance, just allowing them to be strong where you can and cope with being weak where you can. And someday this will all be different. And sometimes, to be honest, just keeping them alive and standing, that's all you can actually do.
Is it fair to say that a good clinical psychologist is already doing all of this without even any awareness of RFT?
Yeah, I mean, I've met a lot of really brilliant therapists over the years in acting and all sorts of other traditions.
Yeah.
And you could translate very, very easily what they're doing into this language. And when you do that with them, they'll say, yes, that fits exactly.
Right.
That language does really fit what I
Yeah.
think I'm actually doing. So you're not rewriting anything. You're not trying to teach them anything. They're actually already doing it. But I would say two things. Even those brilliant therapists, they struggle with a language for what they do. They get frustrated even when they're trying to teach it in supervisions.
Yeah.
They get frustrated with themselves because they know what they're doing. They just don't have the language to do it. And the second thing is, even really good clinicians will regularly come across a very, very difficult case. And if you don't have the language or a system to describe what you're doing, it's quite hard to get yourself, when all of your normal tools and analytic strategies fail you, Because this is a way of understanding complex human behavior, there should in principle be no case we can't understand. Of course, there are many cases we can't fix, to be honest, because sometimes the odds are stacked against people, or we can get them quite a bit better, but not, I mean, that's totally understandable. So if you have an analytic system that is built out of understanding complex human language and cognition, there is absolutely no reason why it could not be applied to every case. We've certainly never come across a case that this analysis couldn't understand and give you direction on how to fix it as much as that was humanly possible. So for me, that's the difference.
And how long would it take to become skilled?
Wow, that's one of those piece of string questions. It really depends on what you bring to the table skill wise. It does depend on, I mean, if you've a lot of clinical experience, you've already honed your skills. If you have been functional analytically trained, your eyes are already trained to see functions. And if you're reasonably proficient at RFT, your eyes are reasonably trained to look for relating. You know, if you're trained in something like ACT, you're very familiar with acceptance. You're very familiar with, you know, approach and avoid. So a lot of the pieces are already there. I would also say, and we all often say this, for us too, a big hurdle is your own experiential work. If you've not done a lot of experiential work, certainly not on an ongoing basis, you will struggle with PBBT because it is about getting functions in the room and it is about supporting them. And it is a really hard job to be a really grounded therapist. Like, it's a bit like, I think, being a parent, being really grounded, like the example you gave, that can also be a real obstacle. And it's very often we have to take people sort of out the back door of supervision and bring them in through experiential training because it's just proven too sore for them, not too hard, just too sore to go the pace with the client. So if those pieces were in place, you know, for the most part, people will come into supervision and be in probably a couple of years. I would say, because, you know, they're working through this type of client and then they're in supervision with somebody and they're working through different types of clients. And it's just a skill. It's just like learning to do surgery, and it's just how many hours you've done with the scalpel. So without putting anybody off or making it sound like it's impossible, it isn't impossible. We have trained people to do it, you know, and they're absolutely brilliant at it. But it does take an awful long time. And there are many of those, I think, foundational skills that if you don't have them, it will take a lot longer. That's just the honest answer.
Is that what then Perspectives does? Is it trains clinicians on the use of PBBT?
Yeah, it's one of the things that Perspectives does, and that's one of the reasons why Perspectives owns a trademark on PBBT, so that we can control who delivers the training, because it is very precise and transformative, and you do not want a scalpel in everybody's hands because people's lives are at risk.
Yeah, is there then certification process?
At the moment, the way it's trademarked is that if you attend trainings of ours, you are certified to do PBBT with your clients.
Okay.
Because we want to train people to do it with the clients, because they, for us, are the guys who really matter the most. Right. The way the trademark is located at the minute, or works, is that no one apart from myself and Ciara Perspectives can deliver training. And just because, one, we just need to get it out there. We just need to trademark it to control who's doing what. Down the line, we will possibly consider looking at levels of certification. But the trademark is only new. And when a trademark is only new, you got to let this thing settle, and you got to get people to a place where they can get confidence doing this with their clients. There's no need right now for anybody to be delivering training, because they need to be doing it with their clients. So once we get over that hurdle, then we'll look at, okay, we're at a place now where we think quite a few folks are at training level, then what are we going to do with that? But remember, we've been doing this, you know, I'm working in this area for over 20 years. it would be quite a while before someone would catch up with us. I don't mean
Yeah.
that to sound arrogant, but I'm just being honest in terms of the skill set. So,
Yeah.
people wanting to be trainers right now, that's not the most important question. The most important question is how do we get people trained to deliver this
Right.
with the clients? And that is our immediate hurdle. So Perspectives does a lot of work with the public as well, but that's one of the strands. That's the PBBT strand of it, is to train people to do it.
Okay, and I know you've spent a lot of time, this was this was kind of created, correct me if I'm wrong, out of a large grant at the University of Ghent in Belgium, and working with people, or clients around in Europe. Is the United States, Canada, are they lagging behind? Are there people who are well trained in PBBT here?
No, I would say, yeah, to be honest, there's a big lag. It's mostly European because those were the guys that our training was available directly to. In the grant, we very often did a lot of our trainings for free because we were getting a salary from the grant. So it was whoever we were already connected to in Ireland, UK, and Europe. And we just kept extending our connections even before, in the days before it was called PBBT. I mean, that's what the group of people that we were working with. So obviously it's been nurtured and fed in through that group and developed as part with our experiences in training those folks. So it is probably fair to say, yeah, that America and Canada and that West Wing there are very few folks there that I would say that have been in a lot of our training. I mean, people like yourself and other people in Brazil, for example, have started coming to our recent training. So I mean, we're getting there, and it's time and money for folks and things. We appreciate that too. But there are quite, I mean, we've closed our online training once because it was full, and the recent thing I did with Robin Walser, it was full. So I mean, the numbers are there, people are interested, but it's a big commitment for people too.
Yeah.
Of course, you don't really need other certification. To be honest, we haven't really wanted to play that game where this is all a club and whoever spends the most gets into it. I mean, we really wanted to avoid that. At the same time, we have to be careful because it's such a precise tool. If people are willing to jump the hurdles in terms of learning what they need to learn, and that's how they come in, and then they say, okay, I sort of think I've got the basics. Now I would like to, we started doing clinics for that reason, because clinics are for people who are sort of familiar with it, but who feel like they aren't ready for supervision. So clinics is like a sort of slightly silent group where you can suggest a case, or you can just sit back while I'm working through a case with somebody else. So clinics was just a nice way of getting the guys who'd maybe done the training, but who really aren't ready for supervision yet. That we had a group of people there that was what they wanted in between. And then when the people are in clinics, and they say, okay, I think I'm sort of ready for supervision. And then we do blocks of supervision, but we try to match the 3 or 4 people in the group so that they're reasonably coherent in terms of skill or the same types of clients or whatever. They're going to learn from each other. So we have staggered it in terms of the things that we provide. For everybody who comes into any of our training events, we always try to engage with them very fully and say, look, what is it you want us to do here? Where do you think you're at? And if you say, oh, I think I'm really at supervision, and we think you're not, we'll just tell you and just say, listen, please don't waste your money on supervision. What we think you really need to do is we think you sort of need to do a bit more of this, or you need to attend a clinic or whatever. So it's just trying to really genuinely match what you need with what's going to develop you into the next step, and just trying to be as honest with people and create, just for us, trainings or products that are going to meet the needs, training videos and stuff like that. Just things that people say, look, would really help me now if you did this. And we just try and develop that. Yeah, I mean, look, I have complete respect for the ACBS training committee, and I've been on the committee a couple of times, and they really are trying to get it right. I think something they got handed, and it definitely is no reflection on the individuals there. I think they got handed a very clumsy system that really didn't ask questions about people's therapeutic competence. And for me, that is always a stickler. I want to know how much experience you have. I want to know what you've been doing. So the fact that anyone can call themselves an ACT therapist, that bothers me enormously. And that
Yeah.
was one of our key things about PBBT. You won't get to call yourself a PBT until we've seen you directly and we know the deal. We
Yeah.
can't police you afterwards, but we've policed you with a system that's reasonably tight. You then, so if you're in the ACT community a long time and you can be calling yourself an ACT therapist, whatever you want, you then have to engage at a different level to call yourself an ACT trainer. But it is about ACT training. And again, because it's somewhat empty of this qualification as a therapist in that sense, in terms of your experience, it's getting better, but it's still a little empty of it. I think that's potentially risky, and it certainly is something that has put a lot of people off. I think the other issue is the struggle, and I totally recognize the struggle that people who already have the qualification, what are they asked to then do in order to maintain that?
Right.
And I think that is an
Right.
ongoing issue, as it is for many of those organized. And these are not easy things to solve.
No.
But I think that the system as it emerged in ACBS was designed to be very horizontal. But that doesn't always work, because you can get massive variability and you can get people who will play that to their advantage.
Right.
And
Right.
that for me is risky. That's all. There's none of these systems are foolproof, but that bit of it's risky. Yeah, but I think that's a problem with ACT, isn't it? I think it's a problem that exactly the same thing we're talking about.
Yeah.
You've just got this massive variability. You've got some people do ACT and it looks nothing like behavior therapy at all. And
Right.
you've got other folks doing ACT, I think, and as an example, people who are trained to do ACT at the very beginning, and it is clearly functional analytic in orientation, the way they do
Yeah.
it. So you've got this really tightly functional end of it, and you've got this I can only call very, very loose end of it. And one wonders, are they both ACT? Is there everything in? And I mean, that's been I think that's been, a bug for ACT for a very long time. And there is no solution. Well, it is what it is. Some people do it in a very, very loose, non-functional analytic, non-behavioral way. And some folks, that you look at it and you think that's behavior analysis at large. I mean, that's pretty obvious what it is. So unfortunately, if you don't certify and you make it really horizontal and you let anybody call themselves an ACT therapist, you're going to get this massive variability. And it's just not a move we wanted to make in PBBT.
Yeah, and just to draw the distinction too between what a behavioral therapy is and a psychotherapy, very different, right?
It is for us, yeah.
Yeah, it is for us, right? So
we're dealing with behavior. For us, everything is behavior. It's all behavior.
Yeah.
There's nothing it's not behavior for us. In psychotherapy, I mean, I'm simplifying a little bit, but there is a mentalism wing of that says there is a psychological thing that's not defined as behavior, and that's just not what we do. For us, everything is behavior, and it's behavior is understood in a Skinnerian and in an RFT way.
Right. Okay, and I got you. And then also to clarify a really important point, I am not clear on this at all between the practice of ABA and the practice of clinical behavior analysis. And does PBBT fall under clinical behavior analysis? And are there special qualifications or special things that one must do to move in that direction?
No, we like to think about PBBT as clinical behavior analysis, because if your behavior analysis is RFT, it is clinical behavior analysis. It is the clinical application of behavior analysis done through RFT, done through the developments.
Right. Okay.
So it just depends on, I mean, how loose you want to make your term clinical behavior analysis, but I keep it reasonably tightly defined. It is the clinical application of behavior analytic concepts, and the concepts are specific to the row in our case. So it's definitely, but is it also applied behavior analysis? Yes, if your behavior analysis is RFT, yes, it is.
Okay. All right. So now just kind of shifting gears. Thank you so much for clarifying that. So shifting gears, is there anything now around the corner in the future of this is going to continue to expand, or are we kind of still working within this model?
I think on the scientific end, and that's not my job anymore, but I think on the scientific end, I would like to see more proof of principle type
Mhm.
work.
Yeah.
I think on the application end, I think, what PBBT has used the road to do, I think that bit's done, but we've already been developing an awful lot of, I think over the years we've modified a lot of the techniques and exercises and metaphors
Mhm.
that I originally drew from ACT that we were using, and they
Yeah.
have developed and changed. I mean, so dramatically. We use analogy so much more than metaphor, for example. And so, what Kira and I have been working on is
Mhm.
developing those techniques, developing those exercises, developing those
Mhm.
analogies, and really writing it down, like we've been working on a book, writing it down so that people can go and see what it looks like, and making videos
Mhm.
and things, and see what do these guys look like when they're actually in therapy. And you can just see the way that we've developed the analogies and the exercises
Mhm.
and things, and we do a lot of physicalizing exercises and things. So for us, it's just really writing down all of those changes that we've been
Yeah.
making, because we didn't just create an analytic system, we've actually changed the techniques an awful lot
Yeah. Yeah.
as well.
I thought, now that you mentioned using analogy, right? Or is I thought the brilliant part of the second example in the paper, and I cannot remember, it was a mention of a stream, right? Oh yeah, let's see. Once the functional properties of the word stream had been established as a way to talk about her psychological struggle,
Yeah.
the therapist then validated the stream by highlighting the coherence between the stream and how the therapist herself would react if she was in a similar stream. Okay, so that was alliance building. But then, am I getting this right? That the therapist used the stream as a network to create a metaphor that
Yeah.
sought to undermine the behavioral control. So basically, you created a metaphor. So you use that term to describe something that was, I guess, sort of avoidant, right? And use a term to distance herself. Not only that, but then built a metaphor
Yeah.
around the term.
Yeah, we did.
Where now
Yeah.
she's sitting on a rock that's safe, and then dipping her toe in the
Yeah.
stream.
Yeah, we do
And
that
it's
all
like,
the time.
wow, that's really brilliant. That's a
It's
really
great.
very specific use of metaphor.
Yeah, it really is. We tend to put in like a little mutually entailed relation first. Like, you
Yeah.
know what, that's wow. I mean, that's a real battle you got going on there.
Yeah.
And then we'll add the battle by, see that battle. You must really feel like you're underneath it, like you're stuck inside. And then as the system is tilting, we then use that relation that will build up complexity and those new derivations, and then we'll start to reshape the functions when they're in there. So we'll start off with like a one word. It'll become a bit of an analogy, and then it will be built up into a metaphor that directly captures all the functions and just dumps them all inside it. And we do that a lot. It is incredibly powerful, but you have to have done your homework.
Yeah. And the brilliant thing is they have no idea explicitly, right? So it's really a backdoor action, which leads me to like a really important question, because we're dealing with in this country, right? I had mentioned before, you can sit down with a person on the other side of the political spectrum, and it's not only a difference of opinion, but it's a difference of how we view facts. So I could say, the sky's blue, they would say the sky's pink, right? We can never agree on anything. And when you're talking about those dimensions of coherence and rigidity, all that kind of stuff is there. To get it through the front door is nearly impossible. And this seems like a backdoor action where
Yeah, it really is. I mean, like, for example, if you look at political situations like that, where the ideologies are just completely opposite, you're not going to change the relating. You may just have to change the functions. Our job in that stream metaphor was to get the functions to shift so that when the client started to look for germs or whatever it was, she realized the detail doesn't matter. I'm already drowning. The life has already just gotten sucked out of me in this very moment. So that was really to wrestle with the functions. And in a situation like that, where the two relational patterns are the opposite, sometimes all you can do is say, listen, you may be Protestant, I may be Catholic. We are never going to agree. But what about we have a common purpose? What about we have a common function? What is it that we can actually do together? If you can't change the relating, then you've got no option but to start to work on the functions. There's just no other option open to you.
Yeah, that's something to definitely think about. Has this been broadened out or tried to be broadened out into the community level? Like,
You ask.
you know what I'm saying?
No, I mean, I think it has, but not in this explicit way. I mean, if I have my sister-in-law who's an incredible participant in the women's movement here in Northern Ireland, and she works from very, very hardcore Republican women in those areas, along with women in very hardcore loyalist areas. And they couldn't agree on politics. Look, it's but they are mothers. They are struggling financially. They're trying to do charitable works, and they formed a group around common purposes. So now they help other women, and the Catholic women, they represent Catholic women, but they help everybody in that because they represent the views of them, absolutely. And Protestant women, of course, they represent their own community's views. That's absolutely fine. But the common function is to help the other women around us. And that dominates any political narrative or relational patterns. So I think communities have been doing this forever, where communities have been divided. They really stopped talking and started working together. And then, I mean, they never talk about politics because it doesn't matter functionally.
Right. Yeah. And it just brings me back to I'm old enough to remember when I could have a disagreement with someone, but we could actually be friends. And now we've moved into a point in history where my wife and her father, they don't talk because he is on the other side of the political spectrum. He's on the other side of the religious spectrum, and that is so now abhorrent. Like that's part of that's defining his character, right? And it's like, there's got to be a workaround, as opposed to, instead of avoiding any conversations and walking on glass, there's got to be a part of language that we can use to soften the approach.
I think there always is in principle, but the thing is, you can take a horse to the well, but you can't make it drink.
Right.
I mean, with all due respect to each party's view, there are probably two things that really happened. I mean, one is their views are not respected one way or another. And the other thing, I think, is there are needs that aren't met on either side. And if needs aren't met for long enough, you will get into this very entrenched position. And it's like the end of the slope and really not the beginning of it. So if you combine needs not being met with being disrespected, when that happens to people, they self-harm, let alone harming other people. So, I mean, in principle, there's always a solution, but an organism isn't always ready for it for those reasons, because they can't see how it's going to meet any needs, and they can't see how they're going to be respected. That is one thing I think and it's very strong in ACT, but it's very unique to PBBT. We will take the horse to the well, and we completely respect his views not to drink. It really, sometimes, if you live in a world where it genuinely is about choice, you'll often be disappointed in people's choices.
Yeah, I find that, we would mention that in another podcast. There is a fundamental confusion around surrounding choice, right?
Yeah,
that we can understand context to an extent, but fundamentally underneath, that person has a choice, and because they chose what they did, they're to blame, and you still have that blame network lodged in there. It's conceptually difficult to understand.
It is, and it's
Um,
experientially difficult because you look around and you think it would be better for them, it'd be better for all. Why
Right.
don't they? And maybe all that's true. It's just
Yeah.
that I think in PBBT we put respect up along with choice. And
Yeah.
when you put respect along
Mhm.
with choice, sometimes you could just, you really get very frustrated.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Well, then you have all the
nonetheless,
shoulds and oughts,
yeah, you do. And, they
right?
don't help either. So, look, you and that organism are just at a different place. You've done everything you
Yeah.
can to bring that
Yeah.
person to a workable place. And then you set them
Yeah.
free. And it's
Yeah.
difficult. It's difficult experientially to do, but I think you learn you
Yeah.
learn to get patient across the years.
Is there anything that we haven't talked about you'd like to
Oh,
discuss?
no. I mean, we've, just tried to explain to people why we felt the need for PBBT to be a thing, and
Yeah.
and why in many ways it seems different. It's a different analytic model, and it allows you to use whatever techniques you want to use. Some will fit it better than others, but it's
Yeah.
ultimately a model for analyzing complex human action, and that gives you direction on how to change it. And that's, I just wanted a basic science to do that. I really did.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's easier. It's like RFT. Like it's conceptually easy to understand, much harder to put into application.
Yeah, I mean,
Right?
it is a very, very fine precision tool based
Mhm.
piece of work,
Yeah.
but sometimes people's difficulties are just the width of a hair.
Yeah.
And your job is to get in there with your tool and cut through it as best you can.
Mhm. Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much for being with me today.
You're very
I've
welcome.
learned an incredible amount, and I hope that, um, yeah, I plan to learn more about PBBT myself, and grow from here.
Good. Well, I think
Um,
our website is growing. We're starting to really fill the
yeah,
shelves with
good.
the products that people have asked us for. And so, if there's something that you think would really help you and other people, then just email us and say, "Listen, this is where I'm at. This is, do you provide this sort of training or what?" I mean, well, of course, we'll look at it. Our job is to get it
Yeah,
out there.
yeah. And I took my training through Behavioral Connections. Are you offering another PBBT training soon?
Yeah, we have just recorded an online training that we did.
Oh, great. Okay.
That not everybody, given the time zones or whatever, could do live. So we literally just recorded it, and it should be on the shelf for people to buy. So it's like multiple pieces. It's like 4 modules divided into clips. And so that should be available possibly next week or the week after.
Oh,
So, and the
on the
clinics are running. Yeah.
on the Perspective Ireland website?
Yeah.
Oh, fantastic. Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much for being here.
You're very welcome.
And stay safe in Ireland.
Likewise. Yeah, and we're all watching the situation in America, and
Don't
just
forget
have
us.
our fingers crossed that you
Yeah.
get a
We
better
need
you get a better day soon.
we need all the allies we can get. Thank you.
Spit on the ground, hold your breath, try to scare yourself to death. Bury your bones under the dirt and tear your heart and rip your shirt and stomp your feet in disgust. Curse the gray skies if you must, but you'll find when you are done, blue skies for everyone. And take up your wine, break your heart, and give up the race before you start. Drop your drawers and roll around, burn your house right to the ground. Go to sleep, hit your head, screaming till your face is red, but you'll find when you are done, blue skies for everyone.